All right, thank you everyone for coming. I'm going to call the New Hartford Public Schools Board of Education regular meeting dated May 5th at 7 p.m. to order at, oh, look at that, 7 p.m. If you are able, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Again, thank you for everyone who's here in attendance. Our next agenda item is order of business. It has come to my attention between the publishing of this agenda and today, a potential to add an agenda item. John, if you'd like to make a motion.
Yes, I'd make a motion to discuss the pre-K program as part of the.
Okay, so we would add under new business under two-thirds vote of the board to add further discussion regarding the pre-K program under new business. Do we have a second?
Second.
So we have a motion by John, a second by Tim. Is there any discussion on that motion?
Is this different from Section E where it says pre-K sections?
Yeah, the pre-K section under Section E is just a board chair report on that. There's been a request for additional discussion regarding the programming and pulling together some information for public information.
So I found out with the reports and this report is similar to discuss. We need to have that.
Okay, so this motion has to pass by 2/3 of the members present. So all those in favor, please signify by raising your hands. That is unanimous. So we will add under new business pre-K programming discussion. I do not have any other changes to the order of business. We'll move on to item C on our agenda, which is communication to the Board of Education. Since our last meeting, we have received 5 communications to the Board of Education. For the record, I will acknowledge receipt of a 4/2/2026 anonymous email regarding the with gratitude on World Autism Awareness Day. You saved my life. Was an email received. Jeff had replied to that email. On 4/14, we received an email from Shannon Nicholas. That email is in regards to concerns regarding the planned transition from 4 second grade classrooms to 3 third grade classrooms next year. Our superintendent also replied to that email on 4/22. We received a communication to the board on 4/16 and a follow-up on 4/19 from a J. Alden Bailey regarding finance hearing, expansion of our taxable liabilities concerns. And then finally on 5/1 received an email from Kevin McDonald. This was regarding mowing at Bakerville Consolidated School, as well as some concerns regarding some depressions. Also, our superintendent has replied to that email and set up a meeting with them. So those 5 communications will be recorded with our minutes. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Would anybody like to address the board? All right. Seeing none, we will close public comment and move into our next agenda item, which is superintendent's report. And I'll turn it over to Superintendent Suso.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Chairman Kleps. Would love to welcome up at this time Mr. Leonard Lockhart to present to the Board of Education. Leonard Lockhart, as he's coming up to the microphone, has served on the Windsor Board of Education since 2012, holding various leadership roles, including president, vice president, and finance chair. At the state level, he is the immediate past president of the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, also known as CABE, and currently serves as chair of the Capital Region Education Council, CREC. At the national level, Mr. Lockhart has been a member of NSBA's Board of Directors since 2023. He has contributed to numerous committees, including finance, policy, and constitution and bylaws, and most recently served as the association's president-elect. Professionally, Mr. Lockhart has over 29 years of experience with Johnson Controls, where he currently serves as an HVAC control systems lead. A dedicated public servant, he has been a volunteer firefighter in Windsor since 2006, where he holds the rank of captain. Mr. Lockhart is married with 4 children, a daughter-in-law, and 2 grandchildren. Outside of his wonderful biography, I can attest that he is a fierce advocate for education, and it is my humble privilege truly to welcome him up to present to the Board of Education here at New Hartford today.
Mr. Chairman, to the board, to Mr. Souza, it's good to see you, Mr. Souza. I remember going through a class with you at Central Connecticut State University as an aspiring superintendent, and you are now here, so congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, that bio is humbling, but I just want to say for the record, this is my first meeting outside of my own board and correct, where I'm representing not only CABE, but as the National School Board Association's president. So this is a very, very humbling moment for me, and I'm glad to be here and share that with you guys. So if we can have a picture afterwards that I can send to CABE, that would be greatly appreciated. So good evening, Superintendent Souza and members of the New Hartford Board of Education. I am here as the immediate past president of CABE to recognize the efforts of the New Hartford Public Schools and to present you with an award. In order to receive a Bonnie B. Carney Award of Excellence for Educational Communications, entries must meet all of the following criteria. First is the general criteria, which includes clarity of message, image, and consistency. Second, the specific guidelines of readability, editing, graphics, type, format, presentation, design, and the value of the expenditure. I am happy to present to you the actual award for supporting our students through district budgeting. CABE has been honoring school districts with the Award of Excellence for Educational Communication since 1975. In 2016, the award was renamed to honor longtime CABE staff member Bonnie B. Carney in recognition of her 47 years of dedication to education focused on communications. With this award, CABE's goal is to identify and honor the hard-working people in school districts and for their continued effort to communicate effectively. I'm going to vote to dance, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of CABE, we congratulate you on your award. Here's the actual citation that you submitted that you can frame with the blue ribbon that goes along with it as well. And on behalf of Meg Scatter, our president, congratulations.
Thank you. Nice. Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Yep. Take your time.
Sure. And I'm just coming from work. I work at Johnson Controls. I'm a blue collar worker, so I had to change it to the parking lot a little bit. Please pardon my friends. But I do have the cake for you. No, sir, you want to share it. Congratulations.
Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much. Do well.
Appreciate it. Yes, sir. Will do.
I'll stick around for a little while.
All right, outstanding. Congrats again to the New Hartford Board of Education. Historically winning awards and being presented by CABE. So thank you again, Mr. Lockhart, for joining us today and making that presentation. Much appreciated. All right, up next in Superintendent's Report, we have our student representative. So I have your presentation ready to go. And also after the presentation today, can we get a picture with the full board with our reps? Fantastic, thank you. So I'd like to welcome up Daisy and Vivian. Come on up.
Our sixth grade Ellis Island and Statue of Liberty trip.
Why did we go in the first place? Immigration in the 1900s.
In social studies, we learned that millions of immigrants from places such as Europe, Asia, France, and Italy came to America to start a new and better life for themselves. Some came here just for adventure, but most came here by force. For example, thousands of immigrants came to the U.S. because of war and famine. They needed to get away from all of it. Others came here because of religious reasons, but they all decided on one thing. They all went on a voyage to America. The United States would now be their new home.
The immigration simulation. The immigration simulation was an activity where the sixth graders got the chance to discover what it was like to pass through mental screening activities on Ellis Island. We each had gotten a person to play the character of and had to answer questions based on what our character's background was. Although some people made it through the simulation, some people were sent for further inspection, which would determine whether they would get deported or not. It was fun to experience the life that immigrants had.
The Statue of Liberty. When immigrants first entered the U.S., one of the first things they saw was the Statue of Liberty. The joy and excitement after weeks of being stuck on board a smelly and cramped ship was overwhelming, and most of them started crying with joy after they knew that they had finally arrived. They kissed the ground, hoping that the journey to building a new life in America wouldn't be too challenging.
Did you know that the Statue of Liberty was modeled off of someone's mom? Talk about an amazing Mother's Day gift.
The Statue of Liberty was engineered by a person named Gustav Eiffel, the same person who engineered the Eiffel Tower.
The Statue of Liberty was actually shipped into 350 pieces in cargo boxes on ships from France. They had to assemble everything once they got to America. The Great Hall and the Registry Room. After immigrants entered the gates of Ellis Island, the first thing they would see would be the Great Hall, also known as the Registry Room. They would take many tests to ensure that they would be a good addition to the U.S. They would also do health inspections as well, and one of the tests they would take is called the 6-second medical exam. Doctors would inspect if they were injured or sick, and if they were, they would be marked with chalk. Another medical exam they would do is check, with a button hook, for something called trachoma, an infectious eye disease that can lead to blindness if not treated. They would also be tested on the reading skills, general knowledge, and math skills. Immigrants will be required to read 30 to 40 words in their native language. Thousands of immigrants will be checked into America every single day.
The Chili's and Starbucks Cafe. During the field trip to the Statue of Liberty, we had many meals and stops to get a small drink. Below here, you can see that we went to go eat lunch at the Ellis Island Cafe with a built-in Starbucks inside. For dinner, we went to the Palisades Mall for Chili's. We had so much fun chatting and eating our delicious meal.
The Wall of Honor. At Ellis Island, they have a Wall of Honor. The Wall of Honor are many panels with names of immigrants that had passed through Ellis Island. Students had the opportunity to bring their relatives' names and try to see if they can find them. If a student found one, they could copy the name on a piece of paper so they could share their discovery. It was amazing to see how many people went to Ellis Island.
The Ellis Island Museum. Inside Ellis Island, there was many things that were actually from the ships to Ellis Island. The one that I thought was the most interesting was this teddy bear shown down below. In addition, we saw a ship's wheel from an Ellis Island ship. Students also got the chance to watch a video about a historical item and how it had been passed down from people's ancestors. Lastly, we got to see the ship's manifest, the stairs of separation, and the Great Hall where inspections took place.
The graffiti columns. Along with Ellis Island's many sites, the graffiti columns were my personal favorite. You can see what many immigrants wrote, drew, and engraved onto there, and there are dates written as far as 1901. On the left, you can see me peeking out from behind, enjoying the amazing things that immigrants left that we can study from.
The Statue of Liberty Museum and Gift Shop. On our Ellis Island field trip, the students went to the Statue of Liberty and learned how it was a gift of peace from France to the United States and how it represents freedom. Then we went to the Statue of Liberty Museum where students got to see the first torch that was made out of stained glass from the Statue of Liberty. We also got to take pictures that may have been shown on a big screen. Additionally, students had gotten the opportunity to purchase something from the gift shop.
Conclusion. Overall, it was exciting to see things that we learned in social studies in person, and even better to be having so much fun doing it with our friends. Playing it together along with eating together and examining real artifacts from long ago are just some of the things that we did. This was a very enjoyable trip, and it was so exciting to learn about our ancestors that helped form the shape of our country that we call America.
Yes, that was the sixth grade field trip.
And our student representative.
Yeah, can you guys come back up? Yeah, let's do it in front. Can you girls come up? Welcome to May and June. Thank you so much, Vivian and Daisy. So impressive as always. So thank you so much for bringing to attention one of the field trips that you were recently on, and all of the learning that you did, but also some of the fun, right? Because that's part of the fun of field trips, learning but having fun with your friends. So very impressive as always. So thank you so much for your presentation this evening. Okay, up next, we would like to welcome up our very guest speaker from the Freedom of Information, or FOIA, the rules and regulations, the one and only, Russell Blair, who will be sharing with us some very important information relative to the Freedom of Information Act. Russell has also been in town recently to share with the entire town, and we wanted to invite him right here to our Board of Education meeting so that if we had questions or other commentary, he's going to present to us a condensed version of FOIA. And if we had any questions for him, he is readily available. I could tell you his office, anytime I send an email, they are very quick to respond to help us understand our rights and the public's rights regarding records. So thank you so much. And I will turn it over to you with the microphone. Sound good? And I'll run your slideshow.
Okay.
Very
Thanks.
good. You got it.
Good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. I appreciate you guys scheduling, a session to learn a little bit about FOIA. I know you got a lot of other things that you got to attend to, so I'll, do the sort of the Cliff Notes version. But, what I often tell people, if the only thing you learn is my phone number and my email, please contact me if there's ever anything I can help you out with. A lot of the questions, tend to be very specific, and sometimes the answer varies depending on, the particulars. So anything you ever need to run by me or whatever, just call or email. And I have a clicker actually. So if I can give you that. Okay, beautiful. So I'm going to go through some slides here, but I want to save some time for any of the questions that any of you might have. So, just go through the material, and I know you've got it out, printed there too. So just very briefly, the Freedom of Information Act has been state law in Connecticut going back to 1975. So, we're going on now 51 years that we have had the Freedom of Information law. And really what the law is all about is it's about government transparency through sort of two specific parts. access to public meetings and access to public records. So there's, a bunch that we'll talk about, there's the relation to your meetings, even this meeting, you just had, I saw you guys had to add something to the agenda and you have to take a 2/3 vote and, do all that. And that's because that's part of the Freedom of Information Act. You can add items to the agenda, but you have to have the 2/3 vote. I looked at the agenda, I saw you have an executive session, it's the same thing there, a 2/3 vote to go into an executive session. So there's all those rules about meetings, but also it allows, the public to request records, right? They can ask for information, from the school district, right? We're sort of in the middle, maybe towards the end of the budget cycle. Very common that people might want information about the budget. They want copies of, proposed budgets. They want information about salaries. So this law allows them to request those types of records. So again, the law is, specifically about access to meetings and access to public records. A lot of states have open records laws. That's not, completely unique. What is a little bit different in Connecticut is that we have a state agency where I work, the FOI Commission, that's in charge of enforcing all this. So what's important to know, another reason why you want to make sure you're doing all these things correctly, why do we take the 2/3 vote to add the item to the agenda? If anybody out there, is attending a meeting or watching a meeting and they believe that there's been any violation of the FOI Act, that's occurred, they can file a complaint with our commission. And what that can mean is, if our commission looks at it and we think there's an issue there, we can hold a hearing, and that can mean people from the Board of Education or the superintendent or, would have to come to a hearing and sort of explain to us, what happened. And if we find that there was some violation, we have different things we can do to try to remedy that. I like to think that we try to work through education. So if people make mistakes because they weren't sure what to do, and we get to a hearing and it seems like they understand what they need to do in the future, a lot of our decisions, if you look at the end, it'll just sort of say, going forward, follow the law. It's like, if you're speeding and you get a written warning, right? It's sort of a thing like that. But if we see a pattern, if we see significant violations, we see repeated violations, then we have the ability to, do things like issue fines. The fine could be as high as $5,000. That's our maximum fine. We can order mandatory training. So I always tell people it's nice to be invited, because I've had to do this at other boards of education when things have not gone well, and those can be a little more testy maybe. So, but I always tell people, FOI may not be a concern. It may not be a thing that you're thinking about. That might be fine and good and all, and all well. But sometimes what happens is there's some event in town, some issue, some thing, and all of a sudden you're getting all these requests, you're having all these people coming to meetings, and you want to be prepared. So if you get into a situation where things are getting contentious, you kind of know what you need to do. Because what I have seen is that, FOI, people might be unhappy with the decision. FOI gives them an avenue to sort of challenge that decision, right, through our process. And one of the things, important to mention, and we don't do this very often, but if there was some sort of, defect or flaw in the way a meeting was held, somebody can ask for a vote to be nullified at a meeting. So if there was a meeting that wasn't properly noticed and you made some important decision, somebody could file a complaint and say, I want them to rescind that and go back and have to do it again, because they didn't allow people to the meeting. There was an unnoticed meeting. There was a issue with the agenda or something like that. FOI covers all public agencies in the state, school boards, boards of selectmen, boards of, boards of finance, all the state agencies from the governor's office on down, Department of Corrections, state police, et cetera. One thing that's important to know for, boards of education is if you have subcommittees, we need to do the notices, the agendas, the minutes, all that for not just the Board of Education, but any of the subcommittees. If we create a school building committee, to oversee a project or something like that, any public body essentially has to follow the FOI law. So public meetings, when we talk about what a public meeting is, I think it's important to spend a little bit of time talking about the definition. And I know you might be thinking, gee, well, why do we have to talk about this, right? We know what a meeting is. We have a schedule of meetings. The thing I want you all to be remembering is FOIA looks at meeting maybe more broadly than we would think of it. Really, under FOIA, what a meeting kind of boils down to is anytime we have a quorum of board members and they are either gathered together in person or they're connected some way electronically, and there's a discussion or there's some sort of action taken related to their board business. So essentially, under FOIA, you can't have a scenario, the classic example I give of the what not to do is if the agenda to the meeting gets sent out, you can't have people start replying in that email thread with all the board members present there and, talking about the actual agenda items and talking about what they're going to do. If you have a budget meeting upcoming or a budget workshop, you can't start the discussion before you get to that budget workshop. A couple of things on there that are important about all that. One is the quorum is really critical. So this is not to prevent smaller groups of people from discussing things. If, 2 or 3 of you want to get together and work on something between meetings, you have questions for staff or the superintendent, or somebody wants to ask the chairman, that's all fine and permissible. But when a quorum, which is a voting majority of the board, enough people to make a decision, when a quorum is gathered and talking about board business, then that needs to be happening at a publicly noticed meeting. There is a thing for executive session where, so it doesn't mean everything you talk about is always going to be in public session, but even things that happen in executive session, you still have to have an agenda, that sort of says what you're going to do. If you vote on anything, you need to take a public vote, and so on. So FOI guarantees access to public meetings. Public comment is totally a local decision how you do that. So while you can't ask somebody to state their name or where they live to come to a meeting, when people speak, oftentimes they come up to the microphone, give us your name and address, you get 3 minutes or something like that. That's a local decision how you want to do that. So public comment, there's no law that guarantees access to public comment. Public meeting, anyone can take pictures, record, Facebook live stream, anything like that that they'd like to do. Email and meetings, we sort of touched on this already, but just maybe bears repeating. You can't conduct your business over email, over text message. I know sometimes when things come up, people say, gee, this is really convenient. Why can't we do this? We're not making any decisions. But if you go back to the definition of a meeting, it's discussion or action. And sometimes, discussing something and you don't take action, that might be the thing that people are interested in, right? That there was an issue that you talked about and you decided not to do anything. So that's why even if you don't vote on anything, even discussions about matters before the board need to be done in public. Save your back and forth debate for your public meetings. Administrative stuff, I think that's okay. Requesting somebody put something on the agenda, scheduling a special meeting or something, but the substantive business, you should hold that for your public meetings. There are 3 kinds of meetings that are allowed under FOIA: regular meeting, special meeting, and emergency meeting. Just a little bit on the differences between these types of meetings. So the regular meetings those are your annual, off your annual meeting schedule. So every year, the Board of Education, you'll file an annual meeting schedule, says, when the meetings are going to take place. If you want to meet at any date that was not on that annual meeting schedule, then that would necessitate calling a special meeting. So sometimes budget workshops, if those are not scheduled at the start of the year, sometimes a board retreat, you might do that on a Saturday or something at, some location, and maybe you don't have that planned at the start of the year. Or sometimes, you schedule your summer meetings in January and people don't know their vacation plans, and you realize that, with the second, Tuesday in July is not going to work or something like that. So special meeting is anytime we change the normal, day and time of the meeting. Meeting agendas, 24 hours before the meeting, those need to be filed. Special meeting agendas also need to be posted on the website. All meeting agendas have to go to the town clerk's office. So, most people post everything on the website, but special meeting absolutely has to be on there. So just make sure that when you're filing the agendas, they go to the town clerk's office. Be mindful of, holidays or days that the town hall is closed. If the town hall is closed, you can't file an agenda, even though you might post it online if it's not in the town clerk's office. And some, boards had issues earlier this year when we had all that snow. There were some towns where, they closed their town halls for Monday and Tuesday for 2 days. So there were some communities where, if people hadn't filed the agendas, the snow meant they had to delay their meetings. Regular meeting, as you guys did earlier tonight, you can add an item to the agenda by a 2/3 vote. You cannot do that at a special meeting, so just keep that in mind. I often tell people if you have a special meeting, it might be best to just not have new business on there because you don't want somebody to inadvertently, add something. And I know some of these things seem like very technical, minor things, but anything here, if somebody, notices a potential violation, they can file a complaint. Meeting minutes, when do those have to be filed? 7 calendar days for regular meetings, 7 business days for special meetings. I'll talk more in a second sort of about what to include in your minutes. Emergency meetings, really these should be used very sparingly because this is a permission to have an unnoticed meeting. So this is a meeting of the Board of Education with no notice, no agenda. So the public has no idea it's happening. They have no idea what's going to occur. But the law gives that flexibility because there's some situation that we need to deal with immediately where we cannot wait 24 hours to schedule a special meeting. And I always tell people, I would think of it as like, if we wait, something bad is going to happen. We have to do something now because there's a weather emergency, there's a public health emergency. During the pandemic, I imagine a lot of people had emergency meetings, and if we think back, it's hard to believe that was like 6 years ago, but, things were changing from hour to hour, right? About schools, were they going to be open? Were they going to be closed? Are we doing remote learning, right? So there might've been times when there had to be decisions made where you couldn't wait. If you do an emergency meeting, the minutes of the meeting need to be filed within 72 hours of the meeting, and they need to be posted online as well. There are some carve-outs to all the stuff we just talked about, sort of where, you kind of get, maybe you can think of it as like a special dispensation to kind of forget the rules about the open meetings. But this is in very specific circumstances. So the first one is you can create a personnel search committee for an executive level employee. We see this, oftentimes in a Board of Education when they're doing a superintendent search. You can appoint the entire Board of Ed if you would like as a search committee. And that means that when they meet as a search committee, they don't have to notice those meetings. The search committee cannot make the hire, they can make a recommendation. So even if the search committee, being the full board, interviews people, they select a candidate, there would still have to be a public vote at the Board of Ed to hire that person. Strategy or negotiations related to collective bargaining, those types of discussions can involve a quorum of a Board of Ed. They don't have to be part of a publicly noticed meeting. Again, not voting on a contract, but this is the collective bargaining discussions and negotiations. A caucus under FOI is specific to people on the same board of the same political party. So, if Republicans have, let's say, a 9-member Board of Ed and they have 5 of the 9 seats, the 5 Republicans could meet as the 5 Republicans and they could discuss things in a caucus, and it would not, trigger a meeting under FOI. But caucuses are limited to just the board members. So you can't, have a Republican caucus with the superintendent or with the board attorney or something like that. It's just meant for the members. A staff meeting is not a public meeting. So this is meaning like administrative or staff meetings. The superintendent might have administrative or staff meetings. Even if there's discussion of things that might be of the public's interest, it's not a public meeting that people can come and attend and film and all that. And then there's a provision in the law about chancellor social meetings. And what this is sort of an acknowledgement that there might be times when you are with fellow board members, but it is, sort of a pre-planned social thing. It's a chance encounter. I can imagine with the Board of Education, there might be school functions that you go to. There might be, sports, high school sports that you're going to. So, this is saying if the Board of Education, goes to a high school football game and they're all there in the bleachers, it is not a Board of Education meeting. Provided though you're still not using that opportunity, you can't do your board business while you're in those settings. So you can't be sitting at the basketball game and, doing work on the budget with your board members there. I always tell people too, be mindful of what I like to call the parking lot meeting, which is the meeting is over and then people are sort of chit-chatting outside in the parking lot or the hallway. And oftentimes it's not substantive about, what was done at the meeting. You're probably catching up on other things. But just remember, when the meeting is over, the meeting is over. So you can't linger and continue the discussion after everybody leaves. You can't show up half an hour early and say, well, we're all here. There's no one else here. Let's start talking. You need to, do the work during the public meeting. So minutes for your meetings, really with minutes, I think, I would think of the minutes as really they're meant to be the record of the votes that were taken. Now, there's going to be more than just the votes that were taken at the meeting, obviously, but they do not have to be a transcript of everything that occurred at the meeting. And I've found oftentimes it seems like kind of counterintuitive, but sometimes the more detail you put in, then the more things there are for people to have an issue about, that people say, well, that's not exactly what I said in public comment, or a board member might say, well, you put in this person's point, but you didn't say my rebuttal that I said to them. So, you use your judgment about what to put in there, but it doesn't have to have all the crosstalk. It doesn't have to have, if there's a 2-hour discussion, everything that everybody said. What do you have to have in there? You have to have the record of the votes. So, all the votes that are taken. If it is not a unanimous vote, you should make sure the minutes reflect how each member voted, not just a numerical, but, if there's a 7-2 vote or something, who were the 2 people that voted no, however you want to do that. So it's clear how each person voted. You list the board members that attended the meeting. And you also, if you have an executive session, you list who attended the executive session besides the board members. So, they were joined by the superintendent, they were joined by the board attorney, whoever it is that goes into that executive session. Minutes need to be made available within 7 days of the meeting. And what I mean by draft minutes are okay is that, in most instances, you're not going to have voted on and approved the minutes at a subsequent meeting. And you can't wait until you do that to file them. So they need to be filed within 7 days. If you need to make changes to the minutes, my recommendation would be when they are on the agenda of the next meeting, when you approve them, like you guys did tonight, you could always say, wait a second, there's something we need to amend, and you could talk about what you want to change and approve them with any of the changes that need to be made. And minutes are still required, even if, you have a virtual meeting. So even if you record the meeting in its entirety, audio, video, that doesn't substitute for minutes. So we always need to have, some minutes, because those are the permanent record of what occurred at a meeting. So electronic and remote meetings. I always tell people with this, if you have a lot of questions or detailed scenarios, we have a guide on our website that is our remote meetings primer, and that kind of goes through all the different details and things. If you use Zoom, what do you do if we lose the Zoom? All these different things in there. But a couple important things to know is that it's your choice how you hold your meetings. So there's no law that requires Zoom access to a meeting. So, you can be fully in person, you can be a hybrid meeting with some people online and some people in person, or you can be fully remote. So you have those different options, but it's up to the board how they would like to do that. If you have a meeting with Zoom access, what I tell people is I would think of the Zoom link as like a meeting location. So you need to make sure it's on the agenda. I would advise you double check, because I've had situations where, especially if you have somebody who's working on different things and they're copying and pasting the Zoom links, make sure it's the correct link, test it and all that. Because if you realize, that the 2 hours before the meeting that the link was incorrect, it's too late to fix it, basically. So anything with the agendas, if you don't realize the error until less than 24 hours before the meeting, it would be impossible to rewarn it properly under FOIA. So sometimes I get calls from, for selectmen or, board chairs, and they realize, the morning of the meeting, hey, something is wrong on here. We forgot to do this. We forgot to do that. And sometimes that means that if you want to be compliant with FOIA, you may have to postpone a meeting. And I know that can be very frustrating. I know people are very busy and, schedules are tough. So I think it's really important always to double check these things, before you post them, or if you ever have questions, how to do something, contact somebody and try to figure that out ahead of time. Sometimes people don't catch these things, right? Sometimes we don't realize until after the meeting that something happened, and you can't always address that. But if you know ahead of time, better to try to fix it, even if it might mean you have to postpone the meeting and have a special meeting later in the week or something like that. The last thing with the remote meetings I'll say is that board members can always participate remotely. So if you ever have a scenario where a board member can't physically make it to the meeting, they can request and say, I would like to participate, remotely. And it could be, a Zoom. It could be as simple as they could be on speakerphone on somebody's phone, as long as the people in the room can hear them. When they vote, they would just have to identify themselves, and do a roll call vote, when they're voting. Executive session. This is probably the hardest thing for public meetings. And I think it's because it's the most open to interpretation. A lot of the other stuff we talked about, agendas are 24 hours, the minutes are 7 days. This one, there's a little bit more discretion. And, quite honestly, I will say where I find people get themselves in trouble with this sometimes is when they really try to shoehorn something into an executive session that doesn't really naturally fit. And if you think about executive session, it's not to prevent boards from having difficult conversations, right? Sometimes there can be decisions that you might have to make or things you have to do that might not be popular. There might not be people who like those. That's not the reason for an executive session. Really, an executive session, and I think this will kind of become evident when we talk about the different reasons, oftentimes it's to protect the interests of the town, of the school district, of different individuals. So when we talk about executive session and when we can have an executive session, the first reason would be to discuss any personnel matters. So this can be about the board, or it could be about employees that the board supervises. So if there was a vacancy on the board, you could do interviews in an executive session. You could obviously interview candidates for, staff positions as well. Disciplinary matters, dismissal of somebody, a health matter, an evaluation of the superintendent, that could be something done in executive session. The person who is the subject of the session, they have to be notified because FOI gives them the right to demand the discussion instead happen in open session. So if you think about it, it doesn't mean that they're always going to get invited into the executive session, but you have to tell the person and then they can decide whether they want that matter heard in public or not. Pending claims or litigation, this is keyword there being pending. So this is lawsuits, CHRO complaint, an FOI complaint. The board is considering taking some kind of legal action. Maybe you got some, adverse decision from a state agency and you want to appeal it or something. So those are all things that could be discussed in executive session. You can discuss security matters if there's a concern that public discussion would, compromise a security strategy or a security plan. We see this a lot at boards of education. If you have a security consultant who you've hired to, look at vulnerabilities in the school district, you unfortunately might not want to have a public conversation, especially we live in a world where, meetings can be recorded and videos can last forever and be on YouTube or something. So this would allow you to have an executive session to go into some of those particular, security details that you don't want to have out there for public consumption. You can also have an executive session to discuss the sale or lease of property. This is, by the school district or the municipality. So, if you were, considering a location for some kind of new facility, or maybe you want to sign a lease somewhere for Board of Ed office space, you don't have to kind of show your hand publicly so that the person who owns the property says, hey, the Board of Ed wants this lease. Now we're going to raise the price, right? Because we think they can pay for it. It was only $9,000 a month, and now we're going to raise it to $15,000 because we know the board talked about it at this meeting that they want that location. So it allows, prior to the offer being put in, an executive session, and then you could, vote to authorize the superintendent to enter negotiations or whatever it is that you need to do. And then any records that are exempt from FOI, you can discuss in an executive session. So obviously one of the biggest things that school districts, need to be aware of is FERPA. So oftentimes, when you have a, specific student matter, you can have an executive session because you're discussing, student information. And it's even why, it depends how it's done. But in some cases, there are, expulsion hearings. They're not open to the public, but you'll see agendas for boards of education where it'll say in executive session, they're going to talk about a student disciplinary matter. And they can't do it in public session because FERPA prohibits them from disclosing that student information. So if we have an executive session, we need a 2/3 vote to go into the executive session. So make sure you do that. You take the 2/3 vote. When you're putting together the meeting agenda, this sometimes seems counterintuitive to people, but agendas need to fairly apprise the public of what will be discussed at a meeting, and that includes an executive session. So you want to avoid just saying, executive session personnel or executive session, security. And I saw the agenda you guys had tonight, and I thought there was a really well worded the way that it was, right? It's an attorney-client memo, and it sort of talks about the topic. And that's good. You should strive to do that with executive sessions. And I know sometimes people think, well, we're not trying to give away what we're going to talk about, right? It's an executive session, and that's true. But the courts in Connecticut have said that the topic, sort of generally needs to be needs to be known. So if you're talking about a disciplinary matter involving a teacher, you don't need to necessarily identify the teacher by name, but you want to say, potential discipline of a teacher or something, not just a personnel matter, because a personnel matter could be appointing a new board member or, talking about the superintendent, right? So there's all these different things that might be. You can't vote during executive session. So, even if you talk about things and sort of come to sort of an idea, maybe a consensus of what we want to do, you still have to come out and take a public vote on that action. And with executive session, you can invite in anybody that you need to assist you, but do not create a second audience. And what I mean by that is the statute is specific, and it says the people that go into executive session should be there for the purposes of giving opinion or testimony. So it's quite common that you'll have your superintendent or you'll have your board attorney. But we had a case a couple of years ago where we said even a superintendent, if there was an issue where they were not involved for some reason, then they don't just get to come in automatically because they're the superintendent, right? A lot of these things you are going to have them there because they're going to be advising you and counseling you and all that. But if there was something not involving the superintendent, then they don't just get to come in because, they're here at the meeting. So bring in the people that you need. You can ask them the questions, ask them for their opinion. But really the deliberation among the board members is really meant to be just that, the deliberation among the board members. So I'm not going to go through all this stuff on public records, but there's just a couple of things I just want to cover very briefly, and then happy to take any questions on any of this. What is a public record? It's a broad definition in the law. So public records or files, any recorded data or information relating to the conduct of the public's business. Prepared, owned, used, received, or retained by a public agency. So, I always tell people when I do this in like a town hall, like 95% of the stuff in a town hall is public record. Schools are a little different. Obviously the student stuff is, protected by FERPA. But as a board member, again, most of the stuff that you receive may be absent attorney-client, privileged documents. But all the stuff in the board packet, budgets that you're voting on, communications that the board received that you guys were talking about earlier, those are all things that are public records. And the way FOIA basically operates is if you have something that is a public record, then the obligation is to provide a copy of that if somebody requests that, unless there's a state or federal law that says otherwise. So that is like where FERPA comes into play. There's exemptions in the FOI for a bunch of different things, draft documents, personal notes, certain personnel files. Another thing I think important for board members to know is the device the record exists on does not matter. So people can ask you for copies of records that might exist on your personal cell phone. They can ask you for text messages. They can ask you for emails. And regardless of whether you use a town email, your own email, town phone, I know you don't have town phones, but the device doesn't matter. What matters is the messages. So somebody could say, I want any text messages between the Board of Ed chair and the Board of Finance chair, in the week after the Board of Finance meeting on the budget. I want to see if they were talking about the budget. Somebody could ask for those texts or those emails. Does not mean that they get to, take your phone or go through your phone. The commission's not going to go through your phone, but you would have the obligation to do a search and see if you have anything responsive to that. So the only thing on here I want to highlight, a lot of this is going to be more for the administrative staff who are going to handle the records requests. The vast majority of records requests are going to go to the school district. The only thing you guys really have that they don't is your own individual correspondence, and that's usually what I see where board members have to do some of the searching. But an FOI request is specifically a request for public records. So when I say you don't have to answer questions, do research, or create records that do not already exist, it doesn't mean you're never going to do that. If you're an elected member of a board of education and you never answer anybody's phone calls, good luck getting reelected, I would say, in the next election. But what it means is, if you have somebody you're dealing with, they're asking you all these questions, you're trying your best to answer them, and you just don't know the answer. You say, hey, I've given you the answer. I can't, there's nothing more I can say. You don't have any obligation to respond further or do anything more. If somebody makes a records request to you, you've got to ensure that the records request gets fulfilled. So there's a difference between questions, asking for an explanation, something happened, I'm not happy, I want you to do something about it. Those are not records requests. But if somebody says, I want this budget information, I want these emails, you voted on a cell phone policy, I want a copy of the policy, those are all requests for records. I want a copy of the policy versus, tell me why you thought this cell phone policy was a good idea. You don't have to do the latter. if you choose not to. And you don't have to create records that don't exist to respond to somebody's request. If you ever get an FOI request, it has to be acknowledged within 4 business days, and you have to fulfill the request promptly. There's a lot of different factors. It's very case specific, but basically it's meant to be a reasonable period of time, sort of balancing the needs of the requester against the needs of the public agency. And in this case, if there are things that require, your work, you are volunteer board members, you've got families and jobs and other obligations, and that's something the commission would take into consideration, right? That you're not, you don't have all the time in the world to do this, but there's an obligation. You have to try to make your best effort if somebody makes a FOIA request. Exemptions and exceptions, as I mentioned earlier, these are state or federal laws that say certain records do not have to be disclosed. We talked about FERPA. That's a big one for school districts. This is the same presentation I use wherever I go, but there's also another one on there that relates to school districts for, teacher evaluation records. Those are made confidential by a certain state statute. But basically, the thing to remember is, if you're not going to give somebody information under FOIA, it can't be because we don't like somebody. It can't be because this person's been really difficult. They're from the other political party. Those are not the reasons. The reasons are because there's an exemption or there's some, exception, like a FERPA or like the teacher evaluations. So I'm going to stop on this slide. This is just sort of a non-comprehensive list of the types of records that you don't have to provide under FOIA. So some of these I referenced earlier, but things like a preliminary draft. This is sort of things prior to them coming to the board for consideration or adoption. So maybe there's policies or things that staff are working on before they submit them to you. Your personal notes that you take in a meeting that aren't being shared or they're not being, made into other, part of something else. Some of these are legal in nature, attorney-client privilege. So if you get a memo from your board attorney or they, there's a lawsuit and there's a proposed settlement agreement or something like that. Anytime there's a request where you believe records would result in a security risk if they were disclosed. So if somebody was asking for, particular information about the school building and the security plans, we talked about there's the executive session. There's also a records exemption. RFPs, before you award a contract, you're allowed to withhold, the people that bid, while you're in negotiations with those bidders. Once you award the contract, then that information would need to be made public. So I know that was a lot in a condensed time period, but I want to open it up if anybody has any questions, and I'll just go back again to the beginning, with my email and my phone number, because I know sometimes, a day from now, 2 days from now, a week from now, you'll say, hey, now that I think about it, there's something I want to run by you. So you can always reach out to me if you need anything, but I don't know if there's anybody who has any questions tonight or anything I can help with.
So regarding that last slide that you just had up, examples of FOI exemptions in 1-210, under responses to bid solicitations, which we have engaged in the past, we don't have to provide that under FOI. However, is the caveat there that an addendum has to be created relative to questions you can't? So if a company that's putting forth a proposal has a question, I must answer it to help clarify before they put their bid together. Do I have to then provide that to the other companies as well? Do I have to create an addendum and post it according to FOI? I just don't want to be in violation of
So on that one, I might want to look specifically at the language of the statute. I don't know that you would necessarily have to, but I know that that's very common because you don't want to have anybody saying, well, you gave them information that you didn't give to, to me. I think you might want to tell the other bidders. I don't know if like somebody FOIA that would you have to provide it. I think the exemption is more about the proposals from the companies rather than, the information that you put out. But if you email me, I can double check because I just don't have the statute in front of me and I can't remember specifically what it says. But I think it talks about their submissions, but I can double check that.
There was a slide you showed where there's a fee schedule.
Yep.
So is that to discourage someone coming in and just saying, listen, I want every meeting minutes from the 1975 until present? Because you're going to get some spiteful people out in the public who, I'm going to It goes both ways.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. So what I'll say with the fees, if somebody wants to, if they want to request to come in and review records, there's no charge for reviewing records under FOIA. All the fees are about the copies of public records. I think the biggest thing I would, I tell this to everybody is there's a thing in there about if a request is going to exceed $10, you're allowed to ask for prepayment. If you get a really big request, I would almost always tell the person what the cost is going to be and ask for the prepayment. Because one of the most frustrating things that when I get a call, like to your point, somebody wants photocopies of, 20 years of minutes, and somebody spends 2 hours doing that. And then they call the person and they say, okay, we have your 400 pages of minutes here. It's $200. And then the person never comes to collect it because they don't want to pay. So, the fees under FOIA, they're not a lot. It's not going to recoup all the time and effort that goes into it, but certainly charge what's allowed. And certainly you can ask people for the prepayment if it's a cost of over $10. And that could be a way to weed out maybe some people who are, they're not interested in the records. They're doing it as a form of, retribution or something.
So that 50 cents per page, though, that's like if you 20 pages, you're at
Yeah.
$10
And I'll say
limit
one
right
thing too is that is specific to if people want photocopies or if these are paper records. One of the most frustrating things about FOIA, and I totally get it from the public agency side, is that you really oftentimes, if things are electronic, you really can't charge a per page fee. There are some fees on, because those are all about paper copies. There are some fees for electronic records in certain special circumstances, depending on what IT involvement is needed. But if it's something like, somebody is having to copy PDFs, onto a flash drive or something, you can charge them for the flash drive. You can't charge them for every single page. Or if somebody's asking for emails, depending on how that's done, right? If they get a PDF of emails, you can't charge them 50 cents for every email that's within that PDF. So I always tell people the large requests, honestly, the first thing I would do is pick up the phone and call the person, because sometimes people make these big requests and there's a particular thing they're really after. And if you could try to figure that out, sometimes that helps to resolve those bigger issues. Does anyone else have any questions?
I just have one more
Sure.
from me anyway. Under personnel files, how about disciplinary records? Are they a matter of public interest?
Yes. So I would say disciplinary records are generally going to be, things that would be publicly disclosed under FOIA. So if we go to the thing on personnel files, records are exempt from disclosure in a personnel file if disclosure would be an invasion of personal privacy. And the way the commission looks at that is predicated on this Supreme Court case from 1993 in Connecticut, where the court said for something to be an invasion of personal privacy of a public employee, you need to basically prove that disclosure would be highly offensive and does not pertain to a matter of public concern. So in most cases, disciplinary actions involving public employees are inherently a matter of, public concern. In maybe some cases, if there's a complaint that's made and, there's no evidence to support it, then that might be something where you could say, well, this is not a matter of public concern because there was no truth to whatever the complaint was. But, if there's an issue and somebody is disciplined and they get suspended or they get a letter in their file or something, ordinarily that would be something that people could get through FOI. And I'll say too, the employee, if the district believes there's a privacy issue, then the statute does say they have to go to the employee so the employee can object. And if the employee objects, then the records are not disclosed. Does anybody else have any questions? Again, call me or email me if there's anything I can help you with. The last thing I'll say too is, I do this training in a lot of different capacities. So if there's some other role you have in your life, maybe you work for another town or something, or, you're part of some civic organization or something, I've done this, all over, and I'm happy to tailor it to whatever, whatever needs you have. So I appreciate, the invitation, and, please, if there's ever any questions, and, call or email. And the last thing I'll say too, to your point about people who are being difficult, if you get somebody who's telling you all this stuff and, hey, you have to do this, you have to do that, the law says this, the law says that, call me and we can straighten it out. Because I find that sometimes people, use like Google AI and it gives them an answer, and it might not be right because it's just looking all over the internet for FOIA, and it might pull something from like California that has nothing to do with Connecticut. So every state law is a little bit different. So if you're ever unsure, you know, you want to get it straight from the horse's mouth, you know, just call or email. So, but thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Russ. The little USB. Okay, moving on next. I don't want to say this facetiously, but miracles do apparently happen. If anyone's been following updates to our legislation and what the state has decided to do after 13 years of not supporting education at the level that we would like to see, it felt like a huge outcry from the state of Connecticut. So the state budget has recently been amended, and New Hartford will be receiving an additional $172,353 for the educational cost share and another $22,147 in municipal aid. So a total of $194,500 to the town of New Hartford. Special thank you to Representative Mark Anderson, Senator Paul Honig, members of the Education Committee and Appropriations Committee, and Governor Lamont. Obviously, everyone that was involved in helping taxpayers with their tax bills. So look for more information on that.
What was the increase in money?
Sure. Educational cost share for the town of New Hartford, we will receive $172,353. An additional $22,147 to municipal aid. A grand total of $194,500. So this coincides with some of the legislative advocacy that we've engaged in as a board, but also that our first selectman has engaged in as well. And again, we're very happy and support for all of the support that we've received so that we can, again, provide further relief for our municipality here.
Did they also change the formula moving forward?
So they will be revisiting that, and they have created a task force or a committee to look at the formula because they know inherently that there are some issues with it not keeping up with COLA or inflation. So there'll be more to come on that, and I will be keeping the board apprised of that as well. So that was one element of the legislation that was within all of your packets. Another was advocacy against zero-emission school buses. This will be a significant challenge. We will continue to advocate for sensible implementation. We know that here in the northwest corner, electric buses may cause some concern in the cold, and charging and having the infrastructure currently that we do not have. And this would be a significant cost, not only to the municipality across the state of Connecticut. So we're going to continue to keep an eye on that and advocate for some sensible implementation. I'll continue to work with our legislation on behalf of the Board of Education for that. And then there was additional correspondence in there from our Director of Pupil Services, Mike Lynch, to continue to advocate for the partnership for the Connecticut Junior Republic that supports our students and families. So thank you to Mike for doing that as well. So those are some of the highlights of the correspondence that you would find within your board packet. Let me see what's next here. Yes, kindergarten enrollment. Just to inform the Board of Education and to our public, kindergarten enrollment today stands at currently 55. And if recall, the number that was within our projected numbers because the town of New Hartford had recorded 66 births, we're still off by 11. So if we look at 55, that would project two sections of 18 at Bakerville and one section of 19 at New Hartford Elementary. And this may lead to a reduction in force. But of course, we're not done yet. People are going to sign up, still haven't signed up. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that. So there'll be more to come as the K enrollment figures will change. Inherently, they do every single year. But I wanted to provide an update to everybody here so that they heard it directly from us. Up next, we have our OSHA update. So we've been working with ConOSHA, and thankfully, we've resolved all of the instances of safety concern at Bakerville Elementary School. We've started with one school at a time. So those would be the physical and both the personnel safety checks for Bakerville, we will move on to either New Hartford Elementary or Ann Antolini next and continue to work with Con OSHA to be proactive in our safety measures for our school buildings and our staff and personnel. Next up, we have IAQ, and IAQ stands for Indoor Air Quality. And most recently, we've been awarded a grant of approximately $2,000, if I'm not mistaken, and all of the air monitors, which was our next step, and all of the air purification devices that will be installed in the schools, everything has been awarded for free to New Hartford Public Schools. So we have approximately 5 monitors at each of our schools, and we're going to be developing a curricular tie with that. And approximately the month of June, next month, we'll be starting to look at putting together the devices. UConn is helping us with all of this, and it's going to be absolutely amazing. I know that the kids are going to be very interested in it, but it again is to purify the air. It is a very simple air filtration system that is created, but demonstrates under a lot of biophysical research that it does remove impurities from the air and also germs and bacteria, again, to keep all of our staff and our students healthy and safe. Okay. Staff updates. So I'd like to announce that New Hartford Public Schools is pleased to announce a new team member made possible by the renewed mental health funding approximately last month or so. The federal rural mental health grant ended prematurely in December 25. The state of Connecticut prioritized this initiative. We're grateful to confirm that the funding has been extended through 26-27 school year, ensuring continued support for our students. So in partnership with Ed Advance, who the grant was awarded to, we want to welcome Anna Gallant, Miss Anna Gallant, as our school counselor at New Hartford Elementary. And I want to share that she provides individual and small group counseling, classroom lessons, and support for students navigating challenges such as emotions and the regulation of their emotions, friendship issues, problem solving, and more. She also collaborates with staff and families to help create a positive and supporting learning environment for all of our students. So welcome aboard to Anna. And up next, very importantly, last Friday, we celebrated our school principals and our administrators, and this week we celebrate our teachers. They are the family that unconditionally loves and guides our students each and every day. Their influence, their inspiration, their perseverance ensure that each and every one of our students experiences a great educational journey while here with us. And every school day is filled with anticipation, surprises, excitement, and more. You never know how we're walking in through the door each and every day. But I find it truly amazing that our staff and our staff is so well equipped to take care of our students. They're trained, they're dedicated, and they care for the well-being of our 447 students as of today. Believe it or not, it keeps ticking up somehow. So please, anybody listening or Board of Education members, please send them an email or a card of appreciation for their efforts. It'll go a long way, lift their hearts and spirits knowing that you recognize their work. So to teachers, our principals, nurses, custodians, administrative assistants, paraeducators, and all of our staff, we love you and appreciate you very, very much. So thank you for everything that you do. As I'm trying to wrap up, we have our just today, we traveled to our LCSA award banquet and we honored 2 students, and they will be invited to come to be before us at the Board of Education. We're going to take a picture. Everybody, we're going to take a picture with the kids. They're coming. The 2 that have been recognized to receive the Litchfield County Superintendent's Award are Cadence Wallace and Blake Bingham. So they will be joining us next time at our June Board of Education meeting. Pictures. Okay. All right, good. I believe that is all outside of wishing everybody an amazing Mother's Day. Thank you, mothers, for taking great care of us. We don't know what we would do without you. Our lives would be completely disorganized. I could state that from many, many, many levels of growing up with my wonderful mother and also the wonderful mothers that continue to help us achieve what we need to make sure our students are successful every day, from forgotten water bottles to lunches to preparing, you name it. They do so much more and more. And also want to extend a happy Memorial Day to everybody, as we won't be meeting again until the month of June. I believe that concludes all of my updates. Sir.
Any questions from the board regarding the superintendent's report?
Well, this isn't a question, but we weren't supposed to. Can we talk about one of the topics a little bit?
You'd like to.
Well, thinking about the teachers at the high school, we just got some policies that came down from the board, and I'm like looking at them thinking, they need to talk to us a little bit. And
I don't know if we can talk about this, Frank.
but here's where I'm going with this. I just wonder, it's something to think about on the board if we can, I think we're a little disconnected from the teachers, the board. We have the administration here. We have students that come and talk to us. And I don't know if there's some way where we could get a little feedback from teachers, especially on policy. If they look at a policy and they think it's dumb, it might be, and we just don't realize it.
So I could share that we have a very good relationship with not only our unions and all of our collective bargaining units, but if there are concerns, we work together with everybody. So if there's something that they find is out of order or it is no longer relevant and they want to see it updated, they are involved, their voices at the table. For sure, we don't discourage that. I believe when I first started as a superintendent here, we did have some teachers that would attend Board of Education meetings as well. And they also have another avenue via our survey every single year to communicate that to us also. They are very important members at the table for our curriculum committees, our professional development evaluation committees. Their voice is there. And I'm sure, because again, we have the great relationship with them, that if they found that this board policy really does not reflect or is not X, Y, or Z, that they would certainly share that with us.
Yeah, you guys have a mechanism for that dialogue? Because to be honest, at the high school, I don't think we do.
Yeah,
And-
we have open door policy. That's how we roll. Something comes up, we don't like it. What can we do? What can we look at it together? So that's how we operate currently. We don't have a dedicated space of, this is a policy meeting, come and talk about a policy with us.
I can't speak for the board, but I would welcome that kind of feedback because I'm on the policy committee and would love to hear feedback from teachers if there's a policy that's outdated, outmoded, and just for myself, you feel free to communicate that with the teachers that our ears are open.
I would welcome further discussion on that. I think that it might want to start at the curriculum. At the curriculum, either that or at our policy subcommittee level, and then we can add an agenda item if you thought that it was current, and we can have further discussion and try to come up with a plan as a board. Right?
I think there should be some type of avenue. I don't know if a public meeting would be the avenue. I think it's just going to end up being airing out grievances.
I'm thinking like a survey of some sort. that we
Yeah,
can put
survey would
together
be
to get
good,
some
yeah.
information, right? But again, we could, yeah, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I could just say I'm pretty confident, again, if they had any concerns or something that they didn't feel comfortable with how we're operating, I'm sure they would bring it up to our admin. Our surveys very clearly share that they are comfortable bringing up concerns. And our parents are also, comfortable bringing up concerns to administration or to our teachers too. And I'm sure they'll listen to this meeting and it'll be in the minutes as well. And I'm sure our staff can, of course, solicit that if there's further need for it. Hey, just as a reminder, the board is interested, and if you have concerns about any of our policies, so please communicate that to us.
Yeah, my perspective, it's not even a grievance. It's just like they may have a better way of doing things, that we haven't even thought of.
I have a question.
Yes.
For the 66 reported births, does that list get run up against students who got a waiver into kindergarten last year?
Yeah, we've done analysis both back and forth, and we're anticipating, again, because of the cutoff being eliminated, there's no longer a waiver. Would that have impact as well with our registration? So,
Okay.
Yeah, we did compare it against the town hall's register
Okay.
of births.
Any further questions for superintendent report? Okay, thank you, Superintendent Sousa. Next item on our agenda is the Board of Education Chairs Report. I do have two items on that are listed under the Board of Education Chairs Report. And the reason for both of these has been brought to my attention both through discussions that I've heard in town, emails I've received from board members, as well as information that's been shared with me through postings on social media with some misinformation. So I thought it was prudent to be able to come to the board and have a discussion here at the board level to make sure that the record is set correctly with regard to the two items that are listed here under the board chair report. The first is the pre-K sections. And with the pre-K sections, I want to be clear to the public. I want to be clear, again, make sure the board recognizes and remembers the discussions we had. But back in May of 2025, the Board of Education did announce that there was going to be a potential third section of pre-K. And the reason behind that, there were several rationale that came behind why we were going to add that section, if you all remember. The first was that there was a community wait list at that time. And at that time, very similar to now, we had 66 recorded births. At that time last year in 2025, when we had made that decision to put this into our budget, there had been a wait list for the previous years of over 10 students each year prior to that. Rationale number two was the fact that we need to and we should be looking to retain students here in New Hartford. And the reason for that is once a student leaves New Hartford, it's hard to get them back to New Hartford if they go off to a crack school. And then rationale number three that we had gone through was students receiving special education support would be educated with our New Hartford students and not outplaced facilities or other educational entities, which charge 2 to 3 times, right? We've gone through that in our budget season. We've talked about that quite often, that to outplace a student, the cost associated with that is tremendous to the town budget. And those are really the three rationale that we had back then. And again, went back to our records and our meeting minutes to pull that back out. As you recall, that season, that budget season was pretty tough for our board, where we had the failed referendum that happened in May of 2025. That really failed through public outcry and public input that received regarding the clerical aid and the instructional assistant positions, right? And again, referendum went and failed. On May 19th, the BOE met and adopted the revised budget. No, I'm sorry, let me step back. Those clerical aid in that instructional assistant positions, as you recall, there was always a $66,000 number talked about quite often. We had cut that to be able to send our budget to the Board of Finance. Referendum failed. We came back. Board of Finance reinstated the $66,000 on May 19th. Specifically, we came back to the board and we adopted a revised budget to now include those two positions. On June 10th, the referendum went again and passed at that point. So when you look at this in summary, right, the third pre-K was part of the BOE adopted budget. The Board of Finance adopted that budget. It failed at referendum and ultimately passed at a referendum later on, right? So the reason it failed and the changes that were made back then, the $66,000 weren't whether it was a pre-K section or was it not a pre-K section. It was regarding those two clerical aid and instructional assistant positions, right? I believe everybody remembers that. The misinformation that's out there now is that there was a decision made by our hired professionals to do this and add that third pre-K section after the budget referendum went through and after the budget referendum was passed. I want to make sure that everybody's clear that that is not the case, right? The reality is that pre-K section was discussed, included in the budget before the first referendum failed. It carried through to the second referendum, and it did pass at the second referendum. So it was passed by us as the Board of Education. It was passed by the Board of Finance through their adoption of it and sent to a referendum, and it was adopted by the community. And again, it was done for good reason. It was done fiscally responsibly to be able to make sure that our students here in town weren't being outplaced at a very, very large cost. Again, refresh my memory, $120,000 on average, $150,000 on average.
Yeah, $150K for an
Right,
outplacement.
$150,000 on average outplacement. When we have a waiting list here in town, we have the need here in town. We as a Board of Education, some members weren't on the board at that time, but we as a Board of Education made that decision. It wasn't a unilateral decision that was made after the fact. Right. Any questions on that before I move on to the next agenda item? Again, I assume everybody who was on the board at that time recall that conversation, recall that sequence of events.
Just one, everything you said, thank you.
Everything you said, thank you. Just to help those in the community, for students that were, if they do go to CREC, there is a cost there as well. And just to note that as part of the explanation.
Yeah, I mean, the correct cost is that's what we refer to, is $150,000.
There's also, yeah, there's a range of costs, but still it all adds up, yeah.
On average, yep. Yeah. Okay. And the second item underneath the Board of Education Chair's report is the superintendent responsibilities. Again, there was some misinformation out there saying the Board of Education has made a conscious decision, and it continues to make a conscious decision, to have a full-time superintendent for our New Hartford Public Schools. And we've done that at least since I've been on the board for over 8 years. This is my third term on the board. Prior to that, we always had a full-time superintendent. There's information out there that says that we don't need a full-time superintendent. We can do without our full-time superintendent and go part-time, because there are other districts that do that. And one of the comparisons that have been made, and this happened at the town hearing, was to West Hartford. We keep hearing about this comparison to West Hartford. So I went on and I actually looked at what West Hartford has. And again, we're comparing apples to oranges when we talk about West Hartford in comparison to New Hartford. They're completely different districts. But it was interesting when I went on there to look at the number of positions that they have. And it speaks to what we ask our superintendent to do, and the reason that our Board of Education has supported having a full-time superintendent. You know, you look at that district and you look at the number of, they have two assistant superintendents. They have one for administration and one for curriculum, instruction, and assessment. They have an executive director of human resources. They have an executive director of equity advancement. They have a director of plant facilities. They have a director of school safety and security. They have a director of talented and gifted, a director of elementary and secondary education. They have assistant directors of pupil services, supervisors of early childhood, business officials, right? So when you look at this, and again, there's an org chart that's readily available online that talks about department super. It goes from executive directors to 16 principals to directors of all these different pieces to then department supervisors to a secondary assistant principals. And when you look at all those things, and like I said, to me, what was interesting is when you add up all the things that happen in that school system, regardless if that school system is 10 times the size or 20 times the size of New Hartford, we have to have all those things here as well. And we ask our superintendent to do that here in New Hartford. One individual has to take all those hats and wear all those hats. Again, understanding that there is a completely different level of students and number of students, which require more supervision, more people. I think it's very interesting when you look at that to say, that's understandable, but we do ask our superintendent here in New Hartford to wear a lot of hats, right? When we put out to bid any work within our school system, it's done by our superintendent. They have an individual that does that. You know, I work down in the Fairfield County area, and they have a director of construction within their Fairfield Public Schools. So when you look at what we ask our superintendent to do, and again, I mean, I like Jeff, and I'm not, you know, sitting here saying that yes, I am defending him, but I'm also saying that we did this consciously, right? There's a reason we have our superintendent, and really that's what I want to make sure is clear, because the information that's being shared through social media, there's discussion out there and things that are happening that are coming to me. And I'm not a social media person, so I don't see it, but it's being shared with me. I think that we need to make sure that we are clear that there's valid reason that we have a full-time superintendent here in New Hartford, and it's a conscious decision that the board has made. And that's really the point I wanted to make. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say that you're probably one of the hardest working people that I know, and you're well worth the money. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I agree, and thank you for sharing that today.
Any questions, any comments with that? All right, I appreciate that. All right, we'll move on to the agenda. Next on the agenda is our routine business. We have our approval of minutes, and I would take these together, although I think that when I came in, you had said that there were one of them that you may abstain from. Is there a certain one? I don't know. I don't remember the attendance at them.
Was there a special meeting during April break? It's not listed.
That'll be the next meeting. Is that the one you're referring to? Okay, okay. So if there's no objection, we could take these together. So can I get a motion to approve the minutes of February 24th, March 3rd, and March 24th that were all in your packet and available for review prior to the meeting? Motion by John. Can I get a second, please?
Second.
Second by Tim. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Any changes, revisions that anybody had from the review? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. That is unanimous. All right, also in your packet was the expenditure report that we all had an opportunity to look at, review prior to this meeting. Are there any, I should get a motion to approve the expenditure report? Got a motion by John. Second, please.
I'll second.
Second by Kirby. Any discussion after your review of the expenditure report?
I just have one quick comment just to comment on the expenditure report. If you draw your attention to certified salaries, you'll notice that we are well under budget. This is due to several unpaid leaves currently that are taking place. So we're under budget there, which is great news. The same applies because of those unpaid leaves. When you look at employee benefits, there's additional savings there. And one of significant note is we've had a change in one of our outplacements. And that has been, again, another cost savings for us. So we're looking currently to today's date, May 5th. I'll give an approximate projection of about $150,000 or so under budget, which is great news. Again, unanticipated medical or different types of leaves, employee benefits because of those leaves again, and a change in outplacement.
Any further questions or comments on the expenditure report? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. That is unanimous. That's good news, Jeff. Thank you. All right, moving on to new business. First item under new business is discuss and take action on the 2024-2025 audit completion by King and King. The BOE will need to vote on a $2,863 savings in the 24-25 budget to place it into the non-lapsing account. So can I get a motion to place $2,863 into the Board of Ed non-lapsing account?
Make the motion.
Motion by Tim. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second by John. Any discussion? So this is, again, they have, King and Ken has completed their audit. At the end of their audit, as they went through every expenditure that we had for the 24-25 school year, they agree that at the end of the day, we have a very slight savings.
That is correct. Yep. And it's listed on in their budget book as well for the town that they provided. So all of that's public, and realize they're under educational costs of the town. Yeah.
There's no further discussion regarding that motion to place $2,863 into the Board of Education non-lapsing account. We have a motion by Tim, a second by John. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. That is unanimous. All right, next item under new business is to discuss and take action on motion amendment for funding Silver Petroselli and Associates contract. Superintendent Sousa, can you give us a little bit of color on that?
Absolutely. So similar to the motion that we've made in the past regarding the refresh of the classrooms right across the hall here at Ann Antolini, where we said that the Board of Education can utilize up to $20,000, $700 from the non-lapsing account for the classroom refreshes. What we're going to request from the Board of Education is to consider revising the previous motion relative to SPA to give us more financial flexibility because of what I just announced, that we have potential savings. So we can use money from our operating budget because we have the savings now instead of using the non-lapsing account money alone, for example. So originally, that motion was made by Penny Miller, and to follow Robert's rules, only a person that has voted in favor of it can revise it. Obviously, if you voted no, you can't do that. So the motion originally was from Penny Miller to consider the use and approval of $28,500 from the non-lapsing account to fully fund and award the school facility utilization request for proposal to Silver Petroselli and Associates, seconded by Tim Russell. The yeses were Tim Kleps, Penny Miller, Kirby Moranti, John Puz, Frank Rodenberg, Timothy Russell, Kristen Young, nay. Thomas Buzzy, abstain, none. So that motion passed 7-1-0. So what I'd like to request is a revised motion from that day to amend the original motion from the 12/15/2026 that approved that $28,000 from non-lapsing account to fully fund the award, to either use either the 28.5 from the non-lapsing account or surplus funds from the maintenance line in the current operating 25-26 budget to continue to hold on to some of our reserves in the cases of any emergencies or anything of that nature. But if we have the current operating funds now, it makes sense to do that now. So that's why I'm requesting that from the Board of Education.
Okay, would anybody like to make a motion to revise or amend the funding of Silver Petroselli to up to
28,500.
28,500? Anybody like to make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion by Kirby. Can we get a second?
Second.
A second by Eric. Is there any discussion with that? Anybody need any clarification on this?
I just have a question about how budgets work. Is it any different if we have a surplus at the end of the year? Can't you just put that into non-lapsing? Is there
We
any
can,
difference?
right? So, I mean, when you look at it, it's, yeah, that's in general terms, we either take it out of the non-lapsing account now, the 20, what's the number again? 28,500. We can take that out of the non-lapsing and then replenish that with the savings because we are allowed up to 2% of our $10 million budget to go back in there. So what this does is allow us to use the current operating and not debit an account to take it from there. We're going to take it from the funds that we have available to us now.
Is there an advantage to doing that?
There's
Yeah, to me, it's just cleaner and providing financial flexibility with current funds that we have now. And then again, continuing to preserve our non-lapsing account for the unexpected move-in, outplacement, emergency, something that comes along. So that would be my rationale and recommendation to the board.
Isn't it also just beneficial to use those funds first? Because if you can only put 2% into the non-lapsing account, you might be losing out on any overage above that 2%.
Correct, because by law, can only put the $200,000 approximately into that account. So absolutely
So I would
correct.
say it's a safety,
Mhm.
in my mind, a safety net.
What was the split on SBA's contract?
28.5 from New Hartford Board of Ed, 20,000, because that was their maximum, correct? Without having to go to town meeting,
Mhm.
$20,000 from the town.
total of 48.5 for Silver Petroselli for the study.
Why was I thinking it was a three-way split with something?
That was the discussion on the video. All right, we talked about the video when they wanted to video the meeting, which is still in process. It was going to go three ways: Board of Ed, Board of Finance, Board of Select. Any further discussion? Okay, we have a motion by Kirby, second by Eric to use to amend the motion to use up to 28,500 from the non-lapsing account to fund the Silver Petroselli and Associates contract. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. All those opposed? That motion passes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 0.
Did you word that right?
I think so.
Because I thought you said non-lapsing account again.
Well, it is up to 28,500 from the non-lapsing account. So that allows usage of our operating budget.
Oh, I thought it was
up
from
to
the
addition.
maintenance, the 28,000.
It can come from that. It's going to be basically, so up to means it could be a zero amount or up to 28.5 if necessary. So if no longer necessary, that allows us at central office to make sure we make payment from any of the operating that we currently have. Because if we don't need to use the 28.5, then we'll use our current operating budget surplus.
Okay, now moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is the item we added by 2/3 vote, which is the pre-K programming. So, John, I'll turn it over to you, but I think the premise here was there has been much discussion at the task force meetings and some public input regarding the pre-K program, how the program operates, how the program works, kind of some, some more detail around that program. John had asked regarding, with Kristen as well as our chair of the task force, was can they meet with Superintendent Sousa and his administrative team to be able to get more details to be able to share with the public. As John and Kristen are our representatives from the Board of Education, I had suggested that any information or anything that's done on a task force level should come before the board before it goes to the task force. And that's why we added that to the agenda tonight. So I'll turn it over to you, John, to give a little bit more detail behind that.
Thank you for that lead in. And so that's exactly it. And so we're trying to help the task force, but also be mindful of the Board of Education and with Jeff and Mike and others as the leads. And so with there being questions that are coming our way, naturally want to help within the bounds here. And so wanted to make sure that we were sharing with the board and discussing together if this notion of Kristen and myself, not to exclude Penny, she's there too, but the questions have primarily come to Kristen and myself. And so we were trying to reference, as Tim said earlier, some of the past minutes and documentation that are public. There are some additional questions that have come up that could be helpful to be answered. And so we wanted to work with Jeff and Mike to actually put together some information, run it by the board, and then be able to share it from there. And so this might sound rather kind of administrative or in nature, but again, just trying to make sure that everything is above board and transparent in terms of how we're trying to help and gather information. And as Tim said, we'll work together and then bring it here to the board and then be able to share from there with your approval. So
Describe a little bit of the
yeah, so there was some of the rationale in terms of that you shared in terms of why the classroom is added, but even backing up before that, there are questions about the kind of fundamental concepts of, for example, is preschool required or not? And we're so close to preschool and some of the state requirements around education starting at age 3 under certain circumstances. And so, that's one example here, or in terms of, how education is delivered in the preschool classroom and how there's a balance between students with IEPs and general education students, and then also some of the ratios that come into that. And then also there's this questions around some of the staffing and program costs there. There's also tuition and how some of that information has come together. And so, there's been pieces that have been discussed here in board meetings. There's also a lot of great work that Jeff, Mike, and others have done to put together this program and to run this program. And so we're trying to make sure that we're understanding from a ground up what's being done and why, and then be able to communicate that out, as it makes sense. And therefore, kind of like, as with the task force, and I think bigger picture, trying to have a process and then not have this governed by emotion, but instead by actual facts and information here. And so that's where being able to actually not just hear the questions, but then gather information from our experts here and be able to share that back out would be useful for some of the task force planning. So that help.
So again, this is more information share. I don't think we're looking for any motions or approvals. When do you think that you're, when are you thinking the information will be shared at task force level? I know you had this past Saturday, there was a public hearing for question and answer from the public. The next one is, what's the next one?
The next, I'll actually get to this as part of the under J, the task force update. With Kristen being away this evening, I'll handle that update. The next meeting is this coming Wednesday, May 13th, and then we have another public informational meeting. And then also is looking further ahead as we actually look at some of the options here, be able to share some perspective on some of the questions around kind of the pre-K kind of classroom needs and space needs, and as to why some of the aspects that we're putting into the programming and the facilities are needed. That information will be helpful here. And so we'll look to gather some of this information, answer some of the questions, work with Jeff and Mike here, and Kristen and myself. And so it would not need to be set by this Wednesday, but over the coming weeks, gather that information so that for the upcoming meetings, we can share that.
Is some of this, it seems like the only thing that would really be relevant to the task force would be spatial needs, wouldn't it? For that
In a way,
task force?
directly, yes, but why, for example? There's different, again, like there's just, and this is not to fault the community. When I was going back a year when the preschool program has been discussed here, I didn't know as much about it. I've learned a lot more by being here, part of the Board of Education, and talking with Jeff and Mike and doing some research. But as we talk about some of the spatial needs, for example, there's not as much of an understanding amongst the community as to why certain aspects of the spatial needs might need to be included in the plan. And so that's where it might be spatial in terms of how it comes out, but some of the color and the information around that, that's where folks, once they can say, oh, I understand this is the reason that is there, that makes sense. Thank you for that clarity. And so that's where having some of the background information that we can share on behalf of the Board of Education and Jeff and Mike would be useful for the task force purposes. Again, we're trying to be very limited and not answer any and all questions. Some things we're just not qualified to answer. We can refer them to Jeff and Tim, but just trying to have some more kind of grounded and common questions that we can answer.
I don't believe, as I look at it, I've been in attendance at the task force meetings. I think I've missed a couple, but I've been there for the majority of them. In the pre-K program has come up on
basically every
many
meeting.
occasions.
Yeah.
And I think even when we just went through the FOI presentation, we talk about our meeting minutes, and our meeting minutes are public information, but it doesn't include all the discussion, the conversations we've had as a board in these meetings. It's more summary level. It captures the motions and the approvals, but doesn't include all the detailed discussions that we have. So I think what the community is looking for, based on my impression, perspective of this, is they're looking for the information we all know as the Board of Education, but it's not in the public record. So to date, my advice to John and to Kristen has been we should stick with the public record until we have a conversation at a board level. Honestly, to me, I don't have any issue sharing the information. There's nothing that's confidential, right? With the information that would be shared. It's more about, I guess, very similar to what I had just gone through. What's the rationale behind the program? What's the requirements that the state puts on us to have those programs? How many students are in the program and why? Maybe it's discussing even further the cost and fiscally responsible nature of making the decision to have these programs and why we want them in our town. Those are the kind of things that, to me, I think that the member or the people who are attending the task force meeting are looking more into the why. Why do we have it? What does it do for us? Why are we funding it?
Yeah.
Right. And that's the information they're looking for. Because there is, right? At the end of the day, when you look at it, we are funding it. Right? The town of New Hartford is funding the program to have pre-K in our school system. But it's to avoid the outplacement costs that would far exceed.
Well, be compliant with the state law and to avoid there's real rationale, but if someone doesn't understand that, they think it's 3 classrooms that are there for no reason. If it did not have 3 classrooms at 1,000, run from 1,000 to 1,200 square feet each, that could be a dramatic savings in terms of a facilities perspective. And so some of that background is actually quite relevant and useful.
There's also a revenue portion of the program, correct? That, I personally don't know what the ratio is for paying versus non-paying at this point. That's something that probably changes every year anyway.
Absolutely.
So
Yep, as students qualify, it changes. Yeah,
That's got to be updated and brought to the public. Maybe
it's in our budget book too.
right. So but there's and I'm speaking from what I see. There's a lot of misunderstandings about what Tim was exactly why we, back in the Bakerville fight days, everyone thought the pre-K was a way to fill classrooms to avoid closing Bakerville, and that is carrying on right now. You see that in the comments that they put it in there just to keep people quiet about having extra space to close Bakerville, and that's never has been the case. And there's a lot of rationale behind it. And I think there's very much a lack of understanding about why that program is in place. So if we can answer those questions through this committee or even have a better discussion annually.
Yeah.
Well, the status of that program in this room might be a good idea.
100%.
I think this goes back to, like, I don't remember what meeting this was, but we discussed a few meetings ago how having some sort of like a frequently asked questions sort of section would be helpful, like on the website. Like even just explaining kind of how, like someone asked me the other day, what's the job of the superintendent? Similar to the discussion we had before about your position. People were like, well, what does he do all day? And so like, I know what you do because I'm here, but there are many people that don't. So I think that that would be something that should be considered instead of the board or, you know, members of the board having to do like some output of information. I think it's helpful if that's just kind of, because every year these questions are going to come up. So.
Any other thoughts? Does anybody have any objections to Kristen and John meeting with our superintendent and Mike to be able to go through and share some additional information that we all know, right? In more of a concise manner to be able to put it all together so people can understand. There's no objections, then, you know, I don't see a need for a motion or anything there.
Yeah,
Just
no, we
wanna
want to
make
be,
sure again.
make sure everyone's aware,
Board's on board.
community-wise and board-wise, and yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, very good. All right, let's move on to old business. We have some second reads of some policies. These were all in your packets. We did have the first read at our last meeting. Actually, it was 2 meetings. It was.
Seems like forever ago.
2 meetings ago.
Yeah.
But they were in your packets.
Yep.
I will entertain a motion to take all 3 of these together if someone would like to make a motion.
So moved.
We have a
Motion
by-
to accept as previously read
we have a
and
motion-
amended.
I have a motion by Tom. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second by Tim. So we have a motion by Tom and a second by Tim to adopt and approve revision, or I'm sorry, policies 3516.5, sexual offenders on school property. Policy 3541.313, video cameras on school transportation. And policy 6144.1, instruction, exemption from instruction. Any discussion on those? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Those policies are adopted unanimously. Our next item on the agenda is public comment for agenda items only. Would anybody like to address the board? Nobody? All right, thank you. Moving on to our next item on the agenda is item J, reports. Ed Advance.
I don't have any received. Penny Miller is our rep,
Yeah.
and she's not here today.
Okay, so we will have nothing on Ed Advance. School facility utilization task force report. John, I believe you're taking that.
Yes, I am. So just a brief update. And as everyone knows, we have the section on the website, and thanks to Sarah, keeping that updated religiously. And there's been a lot happening here. So, and you know, it's helpful to note the FOIA discussion tonight. The task force is under FOIA as well. And so, you know, literally everything is there. And so meetings roughly every 2 weeks, recent updates, the conditions presentation and report. So SPA had gone through all the facilities and done the detailed conditions report, which is published in the estimated costs of those by priority by school. There was the enrollment study that was done, which is again a requirement for any sort of state funding. So that was done and discussed and available. There was a programming and capacity analysis. SPA had led that with input from Jeff and the team there. And then I guess Jeff been decided. They come back and asked about some additional refinements to that.
Vaguely recall that.
Okay, yeah.
I do.
There's going to be some follow up in terms
yeah.
of refining that.
Yeah.
That's how they, kind of asked to make four parts in one part, coming back to that to kind of make sure it's in lockstep. But that report's also been published. The task force did actually put together an evaluation matrix. So the criteria that we're looking for with weighting in terms of how to look at the various options here and doing that early. So we have it for later on in the process. An initial site analysis and some preliminary options. So looking at each of the sites and what might be possible for a variety of kind of big picture type options across the, the needs, the programming capacity, the sites. And so that first pass was done, and then that therefore, as planned, additional second pass to that to refine some of the options. And so that will be the next meeting coming up on May 13th. The first of 2 public informational meetings was held. That one was this past Saturday, scheduled for 1 to 3 p.m. Actually went longer. Some of us were there past 4 p.m. And so, had I think a very helpful presentation led by Michelle with input from the community and from members of the task force. And so the slides from that are on the website, and I'm just going to leave that at that for now. And so kind of the phase that we're in right now is refining these options, gathering feedback, and then we are still on track in terms of overall timeline. And also to note, there are currently 2 subcommittees of the task force. One is around gathering input. There'll be a survey that's distributed to the town, and so there's a team working on that. And then also there's a subcommittee that is looking at kind of the financing. And so not so much how we finance that, but if we look at some of these options, they're, even just doing the improvements to the schools of some capacity would be in the millions of dollars if they are actually approved. But what would that actually mean? Not in millions of dollars, but on an impact to the individual tax rates. And so doing some estimation on that front. And so the overall timeline is still on track. And so we'll have more updates over the coming weeks here in terms of how things are looking. And as has been said numerous times, the task force is looking to bring 1 or 2 recommendations to the Board of Education. And task force is not making decisions, coming to the Board of Ed, and the Board of Ed would then involve other boards in the town as so merited. So glad to take any questions. A lot has been happening. So
How has public participation, community participation been throughout the meetings and then that public hearing?
yeah, so if I could have waved my magic wand, I obviously want to make sure to respect FOIA, but it was very difficult to be, frankly, to be on the task force, but also to be an attendee in those first 2 meetings because they were so administration heavy. Not being able to do any coordination amongst the task force ahead of the first meeting or between the first meeting and second meeting, even still, we don't have emails, maybe a quick scheduling email, but there's no discussion based on FOIA. And so those meetings were so intense on the administrative side that I think a lot of folks were, turned off, it seems. And so we're trying to, get folks back in now they're really into the meat of the process. And so I'd say the kind of turnout is much lower than what it was early on. We're trying to, get more people to be aware of what's happening and share information. But I wish we could have had more of the meet early on and less of the administration in the meetings. But that's where we are. I'll say though, the engagement during the meetings has been quite high, whether folks are supportive or not. There's been a lot of engagement from folks who do come to the meetings, and then I'd say the folks kind of just you pass on this in downtown New Hartford. Folks seem to be again, whether they're liking what they're hearing or not liking what they're hearing, very much is based in facts and information and not based on emotion or he said, she said. And so that has been a positive. Again, wonder how a process, be transparent, gather information, share that. And so folks do seem to be appreciating that. Just want to make sure we have more eyes and more awareness of this as we proceed. I should also note, related to that question, that the early meetings received lots of views in terms of the the recordings being viewed. That's dropped off too. So the in-person and the views have dropped off despite the quality and the importance increasing. So it's one of the things we want to figure out with this input and survey committee, how we can help to have more folks be aware of what's happening. So.
Any questions regarding the utilization task force? Okay. Thank you, John. Next item on our agenda is executive session. I will entertain a motion to enter executive session and invite Superintendent Sousa to join. Motion. I have a motion by John. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Second by Kirby. Again, this needs to be 2/3 vote to enter executive session. So all those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. That is unanimous. Thank you all.